Okay, so let's kick off. Good evening and welcome to our second webinar of 2024. I'm Jen Jones, the CEO of Galapagos Conservation Trust, and today we're going to take a deep dive into the ocean around the Galapagos Islands. So thank you so much for being here with us. Effective ocean protection is critical to GCT's mission. Well, ultimately, it's critical to the conservation of the Galapagos Islands and fundamentally to the human race, right? The ocean provides half of the oxygen that we breathe. It provides food, it provides jobs, it provides inspiration, it provides myriad well-being benefits. So ocean protection really should be high up on the agenda all around the world. But islands, more than any other community, really depend on this ocean health. So whether we're looking at the conservation of terrestrial animals, the well-being of the local community, or the ocean species themselves, ocean protection links to everything that we do. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who you're all here to hear today. But first of all, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things. At the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A box. You can use this to submit your questions for Alex during the talk, and then afterwards we'll collate some of these and answer as many of as we can. Hopefully we're inundated with questions, and so if we can't get through them all in the hour, we will aim to get back to you on email. So we're really interested in the conversation, so please do share any thoughts and questions as we go. Secondly, I wanted to let you know that the tickets for our Galapagos Day 2024 in London are on sale. So this is our annual flagship event. In fact, we've been doing Galapagos Day for more than 25 years. We're very proud of this event. It's a great opportunity to meet the GCT team, some of our project partners, and lots of like-minded supporters. We're putting together a really exciting panel of experts for this event on the topic of plastic pollution. But what we're aiming to do is to cut through the doom and gloom and actually celebrate some successes we've been a part of in Galapagos and in the region, and look at the roadmap for how we really make a difference together on this topic in the future. We'll have well, scientists from many different backgrounds represented in that event. And so if you're interested in any element of that plastics topic, from science to solutions, it will be an excellent opportunity to learn more, and as I said, just in general, be among people to share the wonders of Galapagos, particularly in the ocean environment there. The tickets this year include the first drink at the bar, so I hope to see you all there, not just at the bar, but also at the event. So without further ado, it's time to hand over to our speaker today, my great friend and colleague, Dr. Alex Hearn. Alex is based at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador, and also is a founding member of the Migratory Research Network for Migratory Ocean Animals. He's a National Geographic explorer, among many other accolades, including being a Mission Blue hotspot champion. And he's been a GCT partner for more than 10 years in a critical part of this oceans protection work. Alex and his team played a huge part in getting ocean protection that is in place in Galapagos now to where it is, and I'm sure has got some very interesting insights of what the priorities are to ensure this protection is effective into the future and extended to the extent needed for the best conservation outcomes. Alex has also just returned from a really exciting expedition, so I can't wait to hear the latest from, well, we normally say from the fields, but this time from the waters, from the ocean. So thank you very much for joining us. Over to you, Alex.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jen, for that introduction. And good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where it is you're connecting from. So what I'd like to do today is a little bit of kind of there and back again. When we finished the work that resulted in the creation of the new Hermandad Reserve, we kind of rather naively thought that we might have a little bit of quiet time, and that's not been the case. It's been a very busy last year and a half, and a lot of the work that I do really is looking at from Galapagos outside. So what is the role of Galapagos for the conservation of the rest of the region? So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a whirlwind tour around some of the field work that we've done over the last few months, and then back to Galapagos. And we're going to touch upon a few threats as well during that time. But to start, hang on. There we go. To start, I just wanted to show you this. This is an animated map of a region we call the Eastern Tropical Pacific. And of course, Galapagos is the jewel in the crown of the Eastern Tropical Pacific. But as you can see there, the yellow bits are marine protected areas. And you can see how these have grown over the last 10 years, really, from 156,000 square kilometers. And at the moment, actually, this now needs to be updated to over 720,000 square kilometers. So this is a huge success. We've more than 5 times multiplied our marine protected areas in the region. And a lot of that has been thanks to the work that my colleagues at Migratory have done. Really key to protecting the ocean is collaboration. A lot of the habitats and species that we're protecting, we can't generate the science on our own. We need to have teams based at different locations across the region. So this, you know, coming off the back of a very successful decade in terms of protection, at least on paper, what have we done in the last 18 months? And so this is kind of zooming into the region that I'm kind of more focused on. And these stars are areas that we're going to touch upon today. And as you can see, some of those stars are in Galapagos. A couple of them are in Hermandad. There's one in international waters. That gap you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here in the middle, between mainland Ecuador and Galapagos. And then there's even one down at the bottom here in Peru, which is just the southern extent of the Eastern Tropical Pacific. So I'm going to kind of take you on a whistle-stop tour of some of the work we've been done. And we're going to start off in Galapagos with the Greenpeace trip that we did in March. And Greenpeace traveled all the way from on the Arctic Sunrise from Panama, stopped off at international waters down there, and then came into Galapagos, and we did a lot of work around there too. This was a 1.5 month long trip. I was on the final leg, so we had colleagues from Hokotoko, from Migratory, at different parts of the leg. At different parts of the trip. And one of the first things that we wanted to do on this trip was just to characterize what are we finding out in the open ocean. And so for that, there are 2 methods that we use. One is, it almost sounds like magic, and this isn't my field, so I have to be honest with you. This is something called eDNA. So you all know what DNA is. It's the code that tells us who we are in terms of individuals and in terms of species. But there's something called eDNA, and that basically is the cells and hairs and bits of our bodies that we shed when we're in the water. In case of fish, it could be scales. And those cells contain DNA. So if we take a water sample and we can filter that down, we can extract the DNA, and we know what's been in that body of water, at least in the last couple of days. So we've been using eDNA as a kind of almost detective forensic work to figure out, well, what is there in the water? Now, that forms part of a large Galapagos project that I'm particularly interested in that we want to understand whether the open waters of Galapagos share the same bioregional makeup as the coastal waters. As you probably know, Galapagos is bathed by several ocean currents, and so we have a lot of variability. We have very cool waters that are home to penguins, you know, and very warm waters that are home to corals. Do the open ocean waters behave in a similar fashion or not? So we've been going around the entire archipelago collecting these eDNA samples, but we're now going beyond that. We're doing that now on a regional level and in the high seas. And that's particularly important in the coming years because we now have an instrument called BBNJ that allows us to create protected areas in the high seas. But we need to figure out, if we're going to do this, where exactly we're going to place these. So our team were collecting water samples, but then in addition to that, we can actually see what's down there if we're lucky, because we deploy these things called BRUVs. And these are stereo BRUVs. BRUVs is an acronym for Baited Remote Underwater Video Station. And essentially, as you can see there, it's a couple of GoPro cameras pointing at a bait canister. And so we deploy these in the water, we let them drift for a couple of hours, and animals come up to that bait canister, and we can measure them because it's a stereo video, right? So this is an example of something up near Darwin. As you can see, we have a nice big school of yellowfin tuna. Oh, and we've got a visitor coming in there. No prizes for anyone who guesses what this is. Nice big male tiger shark having a really close up to the bait canister. And so we're able to identify what species are in the water column and even come up with a measure of relative abundance, something called max N. So we get people watching these videos and they pause it when they think the greatest number of individuals of a given species is, and then we count them. And that gives us some idea of the relative abundance of these animals. By the way, we're getting some of these in 360 cameras soon, so you'll be able to put a headset on and watch that thing come straight up to you. The other thing that we did that was really exciting, and sometimes the best discoveries of all are the ones that shouldn't really have happened. Our boat had some problems with some steering, and we had to anchor in a bay to make some repairs. And while we were out there, we were noticing some baby hammerhead sharks, and that's really interesting because these are endangered species that we're concerned about in Galapagos. We've only really discovered a couple of hammerhead shark nursery grounds recently. But looking at that video, I don't know if you noticed, the head didn't have that scalloped bit in it. And as we got up and close to them, we realized this was a smooth hammerhead shark. As you can see there, it doesn't really have that clip or that cleft in front of the head. And so this is the first time that we've seen baby smooth hammerhead sharks in Galapagos. It's actually the first time we've seen smooth hammerhead sharks in Galapagos at all since a rather ill-fated longline experiment fishery that was done 20 years ago. So we now know that these animals, they're still here. They're clearly pupping here. And we were able to catch a subadult and track her. And as you can see on the right here, that's the track. She actually remained in Galapagos around the western coast of Isabela for at least 4 weeks. Incidentally, that's the coolest waters of Galapagos. So this is really interesting. It made the news, and we're hoping to build on this. If we can actually figure out whether this was a nursery ground, you saw one individual in the video, but we saw about a dozen over the couple of days that we were there. If it is a nursery ground, then how can we use that information to project where we might find other nursery grounds, not just in Galapagos, but across the region, and protect this species, this smooth hammerhead, which is heavily fished, as are the scalloped hammerheads. And you can log into this Greenpeace website and track our sharks. That white line is actually a silky shark that we tagged near San Cristobal, and that's headed up into Costa Rican waters and then also into some of those international waters too. So you can, and we update those every week, so you can check out where our animals are. One of the other things we did was to continue with whale sharks, and this little video here is not Galapagos, despite the blue-footed boobies, and the giveaway there is that rather cheeky cormorant who seems to have muscled in rather nonchalantly, pretending to be a blue-footed booby. This is northern Peru, and our whale shark work took us to northern Peru this year for reasons which you will soon find out. So in early 2023, we used an ultralight airplane to get up high above the ocean. This is our friend Julio Visuete. And use it as a spotter plane, because in the south of Galapagos, we've started to hear reports of whale sharks, but it's not like Darwin Island, which is literally a hotspot. You jump in and wait. In fact, we call it the bus stop, and invariably a whale shark will come across. Southern Galapagos is a vast area with no particular landmarks. So by having the spotter plane, you can see there at the top of the screen, he's found a whale shark, he's radioing us, and then we're zipping over. And Sophie here is about to get in the water. Let's see if she has any luck. There she is, and she can place the satellite tag on the whale shark, and that will now ping every time it reaches the surface. So this is really interesting information. It's the same, large females we think that we're seeing up north, and what we're trying to do is close their migratory loop. So where are they before they arrive up at Darwin? So we hypothesized that by tagging them in the south of Galapagos, we'd get them moving up through the archipelago. Of course, we were wrong, and that's the most beautiful thing about science, and whale sharks in particular. They never get tired of proving us wrong. They're not heading straight up to Darwin. Rather than that, they seem to be heading around the south and southwest of Galapagos. And that makes sense, because in this part of the reserve and outside the reserve, this is where the big tuna fishery operates at this time of year. And it's because that's where the largest productivity is. And these are planktivorous fish. So maybe this is a southern feeding ground and eventually they'll move up, but we haven't got those movements yet. So more to come here. Unfortunately, during our investigations, our plane crashed. We were very lucky that Julio and Alberto here from Frente Insular, who was co-piloting at the time, the sea was flat calm. They were lucky enough to have crashed at around mid-afternoon. So it was, it was dusk within an hour and a half of them crash landing. So there was no sunburn. The sea was calm. The plane ended up in fairly, decent condition. It'll never fly again, but they weren't hurt, and they were found 24 hours later. So after probably the worst 24 hours of our lives, we were radioed in that they were caught safely. One of the beautiful things about this is that when you think about marine conservation, it can often be contentious because you're trying to get people to change the way they behave or don't do things in certain areas, and there can be a lot of conflict, especially on land. But this search and rescue was made up of artisanal fishermen, industrial fishermen, the Navy, scientists, and the national park, and everyone just dropped what they were doing and headed out and looked for them. And so I think it's in a sense, is a beautiful example of how, despite our differences, once we're out on the water, we're all family. Anyway, so clearly we couldn't continue our research in Galapagos without a plane, so we headed down to Peru. And I always say to Alejandra, who's our research collaborator there, she's standing there in the blue shorts and white t-shirt. I said to Alejandra, if you'd let us know what your research strategy is, we would not have bothered coming. I would have said that you're nuts and this was never going to work. Essentially, she goes out in this little boat out onto the water and looks for whale sharks. And remember, whale sharks don't breathe. So they don't really come to the surface. And she's literally out there for 6 hours looking on the horizon to see if potentially there's a shadow of a whale shark below the surface. And I would have said to her, you're nuts, this is a waste of time. And yet, there she is, swimming out towards a whale shark on day one. Within half an hour of being out there, we'd encountered a whale shark, and she heads out there. She takes a photograph so we can ID it, and then our team were tagging it too. Here's our team. The reason I'm showing you this is not just because of Sophie here, my research assistant, who's now part of GCT, but that little boy in the middle there, his name is Ever. And this was a project funded in part by Nat Geo. And what we didn't know is that Nat Geo had also sent a film crew over, and they're making a movie called The Boy Who Swims with Whale Sharks. And this is the life story of Ever, who wants to be a marine biologist. He has a fantastic story to tell. And I hope that you'll get a chance to see his movie when he comes out. I really want to bring him to Galapagos now too. One of the sharks that we tagged was a little male. And of course, we named him Ever after the real Ever. So we're hoping that he'll follow suit at some point. And we got a little preview on the last evening on the beach of what that movie is going to look like. El Niño y el Tiburón. So check it out, the trailer. And I hope that you guys will be able to see the full movie once it's out. This is what it looks like. The visibility is almost zero down there. The sharks do not give you more than a second or two of interaction, and then they're gone. So it's challenging work, but we were able to tag 6 whale sharks. And as you can see here, well, they were all juveniles. So these are different whale sharks to that part of the population that come to Galapagos, very much close to shore. But 3 of the 6 moved into Ecuadorian waters almost immediately. And then that one heading out there, I think actually that was Ever. We hoped that he was going to go all the way to Galapagos, but we lost the signal about halfway. So we're still working on tag retention. But what it looks like is that, these big adult females heading more offshore in Peru towards the shelf break, and then the juveniles are more clustered in coastal waters. So we're hoping to continue that work in this year and the following year. And then the big expedition that I've just got back from now was the Hermandad. This is a short video here of a thresher shark. The pelagic thresher shark is listed on the IUCN as endangered. It's one of the species that we were particularly interested in getting some information about because no one's really studied it in the region. And yet 21% of the entire catch of the Ecuadorian longline fleet, not the bycatch, the whole catch, is pelagic thresher shark. We're talking tens of thousands of sharks each year. And this is we always say how sharks, have a very low reproductive rate. Well, this one pretty much tops the bill. This one gives birth to 1 pup per uterus. So that's 2 pups. That's it. And yet we're, massacring them at a rate of knots. And really, no one's really paid much attention to them because they're not iconic in terms of tourism. They don't come close to shore. So we really felt it was going to be important to target this shark. And that's the video of the first one we caught, which happened to be a thresher. So we were very pleased at that. So this Hermandad trip in June was a multi-fleet trip. It was led by the Galapagos National Park and by the Ecuadorian Navy. And then we accompanied them on board Ualca, which is a Galapagos fishing vessel. So there were 3 vessels. This is the route that we took. We left Puerto Ayora on May 23rd, and we had 19 stations. So we wanted to look at what Hermandad is like down that western flank. We also wanted to target some sites outside Hermandad, but we think could benefit from the protection of Hermandad. And so you can see we visited Darwin Island, we visited a seamount just north of Darwin, and we visited Paramount up at the top there. Paramount was a site that we really fought to get included in Hermandad and were unable to. This is the only shallow seamount linking Galapagos and Cocos that's on the Ecuadorian side. So we felt it would be important to visit that site. So we spent 23 days at sea. We ran out of bananas on day 3, of oranges on day 5, and of water on day 14. So we were restricted to 1 shower a week per person. But it was a fabulous trip. A lot of unexpected accompaniments. This was a group of pilot whales that actually they pretty much were with us for almost the whole trip. And this is taken just literally leaning over the front of the vessel. This is a group of about 15. We'll come into a couple of larger ones coming at the surface here. So when we were on this trip, we had a team looking at seabirds, cetaceans, and of course those other floating ocean wanderers, plastics, that are becoming more and more prevalent. And we actually also had an encounter with a fish aggregation device, which is what the industrial fleet set, and they float through the ocean gathering fish, and then they set their nets around them. So we had one of those too. We had another team working with eDNA, like on the Greenpeace trip, and of course we were deploying the BRUVs. So this is our team on the fishing boat, and we were in charge of BRUVs, eDNA, and shark tagging. And I was really grateful. It's great to be able to work there with former students, master students, undergraduate students, and my research assistant, Danielle, there with the beard and the black shirt. So a really nice mix of experience and age, and just a great group, which is important when you're spending 23 days together. We also managed to tag our first hammerhead in Hermandad. This was really important because one of the key species that promoted the creation of Hermandad was the scalloped hammerhead. We named her Donna, after Donna Bertorelli, who really put so much effort and resources into Galapagos as a whole, supporting Galapagos through COVID, but also into the creation of the new reserve. So Donna here has a satellite tag, which you can see there on her dorsal fin. And we've tracked her. She's that pink line there. Last time she surfaced, she was about 10 miles off Cocos. So exactly what we would expect, right? This is a migratory highway that links Galapagos with Cocos. So he was actually tagged just south of Paramount, which was kind of interesting. We also tagged another hammerhead shark much further south at S12. You can see that here. It didn't ping until it got up here. That's the red point there. That's near Paramount. So again, it's not just about Hermandad, it's about this paramount seamount. And then a couple of blue sharks, which are the purple and blue lines, and you can see how they've been pinging in really nicely, and that link between Hermandad and Galapagos. So these are the first tracks of animals in the reserve. Of course, we need a lot more to be able to speak to what the populations do. And those thresher sharks, well, you see thresher sharks don't come to the surface very much, and when they do, it's just to carry out their acrobatic jumps, and so they need a different type of tag. So the tags on those thresher sharks, and we tagged 6 of them, they're going to continue to collect information, and then hopefully they're going to pop off in 180 days, and then we'll get all the information from them. So it's a little bit of a different makeup with them. So we'll have a follow-up call in about 6 months, I hope. What else? So now I want to move into a couple of maybe some threats here. And kind of linked to this Hermandad work. Remember, Hermandad, it was created by Ecuador, and it really protects Ecuador's side of this swimway. But on the other side of the border, we've got Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica, around the same time that we declared Hermandad, they created this thing called the Bicentenary Management Zone. That's that big box, which is around this smaller box. Now, the smaller box is still fantastic. That's an expansion of Cocos Island, which is a no-take marine reserve, expanded from, oh gosh, 2,000 to 50,000 square kilometers. It was a great achievement. But the Centenary, this bicentenary management area, still hasn't got a management plan. And the latest conversations that I was involved in with Costa Rican counterparts, it looked like they weren't really considering any kind of conservation measure that would be tangible for leatherback turtles, which are critically endangered and migrate down this pathway, or sharks. And basically, they were going to allow longlining, which is the biggest threat. They weren't going to allow purse seining, but they don't have a purse seine fleet anyway. And so really, we've been trying to pressure both Ecuadorian authorities to kind of talk to Costa Rica and say, look, we're making this effort, our side of the borders. You make a lot of noise about this regional Eastern Tropical Pacific CMAR initiative. Well, here's the perfect opportunity to make sure that we are coordinating our conservation efforts. So this is a big concern of ours, that any effort that we're making in Hermandad, or that we've already made in Hermandad, to protect our migratory species is going to be diluted if the Costa Ricans don't follow suit. But we now have a second concern, which is also any effort that we've made in Hermandad, and you can actually go online. There's a website called Global Fishing Watch, where you can track movements of fishing fleets, and you can see that Hermandad is working from day one. The industrial fleet is respecting it. It's absolutely fantastic. But again, not only are we going to be diluted across the border, we're going to be diluted inside Galapagos. And this is something that's probably not very politically correct to talk about, but there is a concern in Galapagos and in other places in the world too, that there's a quiet weakening of conservation actions that essentially weakens the whole reason these marine protected areas were there for in the first place. And in Galapagos, my concern is twofold. I can sum it up with the slipper lobster, because this is a species quite close to my heart. I did the first baseline work of slipper lobsters about 20 years ago, and at the moment I'm doing another survey just to see where we are. This is a really cool lobster. It's unlike the lobsters you'll usually see, and it belongs to a family of lobsters that are less fecund, so they have a lower reproductive capacity, and they tend towards overfishing if they are exploited. This species, we thought it was endemic to Galapagos. We now know that there are some individuals at Cocos Island and maybe some in Mexico. Whether it's enough to support a population or whether it's just larvae that settle there and grow, we don't really know. But this traditionally has been a species that we eat in Galapagos, and it's very tasty. And we're concerned that the lack of management and some loopholes has led it to population declines. And so I've started revisiting my sites from 20 years ago, and the initial findings aren't great. For example, in theory, we're only allowed to export 10 individuals, I think it is, per person. And so it's not for commercial consumption. But then what you find is that someone will export a whole box and just get their friends and family to give them their ID cards, and then you're exporting 100 at a time. We're also finding them for sale in shops here in Quito, which is not legal. And my recent concern is the new fisheries calendar, which specifically states that one of their goals is to seek for international markets for the species. And I just find that incredibly irresponsible. And my concern is that who's speaking for the lobsters at these workshops? And I suspect that the biology and the ecology of the islands is not really being considered anymore. I think it's more to do now with how can we make more money for certain groups of fishermen. It's not even all the fishermen. And I think this is a misguided path to follow. Let me show you. This is just don't take my word for it. Let me show you. This is a night's haul of slipper lobsters back in 2023 from Fernandina Island. This would have been 4 divers. And as you can see there, we all 4 came up with bags full of slipper lobsters. And what we do is we'd measure those, we'd tag those, and we'd release them back in the water. And then if they were caught again, we were looking at their growth. And by the way, they grow incredibly slowly. One of these lobsters was given back to me 12 years later. It had grown 2 centimeters in 12 years. This is what we came across in June 2022.
Well, we found some. I would be hoping to catch maybe 3 times that amount, but it's not good. Little male. So these grow so slowly. In 2015, someone brought me a tagged lobster that I tagged 12 years earlier, and it had grown 2 centimeters in 12 years. Oh, yeah. So something with that slower growth rate should never be. They're not really apt for exploitation. So anyway, let's measure him, get him back in the water. Yeah, 14.0 and a 67 millimeters, so 6.7. All right, okay. It might be easier to do it from the side of the boat. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see, that sized animal, that amount of abundance. Should we really be thinking about looking for international markets for this species? And then my final point is longlining. And as I hope you all know, longlining is illegal in Galapagos. It's been illegal pretty much since the Marine Reserve was created. This is a method of fishing where you set a nice long line with hooks and then you leave it to drift, and then the idea is that you catch tuna, but then of course you'll also catch sharks and you can also entangle turtles and occasionally seabirds and sea lions as well. So really, it's not a method that's apt for Galapagos. Over the years, there have been some experimental longline fisheries. Probably the most rigorous one, which was done in 2004 with trained observers, independent observers, came up with about 40% of the catch was sharks in the warm season and 77% was sharks in the cool season. Since then, there have been a couple of other experimental fisheries. There's one in 2012, but had a lot of problems with observers not going out or not reporting, and they obviously had less of a bycatch, around 10%. But the point is that this is a method of fishing that will catch large pelagic, so tuna, billfish, and sharks. It is selective in terms of size, but not in terms of species, and that sometimes cause for debate because people like to say, well, it is selective. Well, yes, for size, not necessarily for species. And it does occur illegally. And so every so often there's a seizure of long lines. Now, what's happened in the last couple of years is that there seems to be a real push to legalize longlining. And if you look back on what's happened, there's been a number of scientific papers published. You'll see there 3 of them. One of them actually just came out last week. trying to paint longlining in a different light and generate debate. And then there's been a lot of work done in Galapagos, and these are done by people who are scientists with strong links to a particular component of the fishing sector. And there's been a lot of work in Galapagos to kind of greenwash the image of longlining. And that's kind of softened up the local community, and I should say local NGOs too. And what's happening now is that there's a discussion to create a technical commission inside the fisheries regulations that would make decisions about fishing gear. And of course, guess who would be in that fisheries commission? And then they would elevate that so that the authorities could just rubber stamp it. And at the same time, there's a big push to include longlining in this fisheries regulation. And there's going to be a workshop later on this year that is basically set up to look at, okay, how can we make longlining work in Galapagos? And I've been trying to push to consider how can you make the ban work better rather than how can you make longlining work. But this it seems to be a way of allowing longlining to be approved without any particular person or group being made accountable to it. And I want to flag that because I think the international community has a role to play here. And I think the Galapagos community has a role to play here. This is happening very much between members of fishing sector, some of their technical advisors, and the authorities. And I think this needs to be opened up to a wider audience. And I don't want to end just by saying that we need to continue the ban on longlining and that's that. I think there are solutions here. And I think one of the problems is I was in a meeting the other day just before the Hermandad trip, and I thought, oh my God, I've been in the same meeting 24 years ago. Nothing has changed. And we're still saying in Galapagos, you know, we have all these fishing boats and we need to find ways to allow them to make a decent living. I would flip that and I would say, let's not think about fishing boats. Let's not think about that at all. Let's think about what does Galapagos need. For example, I find it very hard to find a research vessel, and I know I'm not the only one. We don't have research vessels in Galapagos. We have about a dozen fishing boats that could be readapted to some of this. So instead of trying to generate a tuna fishery, why not let's adapt whatever the need of Galapagos is. Is it 2 research and film vessels? Is it 3? Whatever that is, let's figure it out. Let's do the numbers and let's adapt some of those fishing vessels to new businesses. This is a business. It's a money-making business. I pay when I go out, and so do film crews. And there are several scientific organizations, universities, NGOs that use these. There are fishermen now being hired by the national park to do beach cleanups, plastics. Why not make this part of the budget of the national park and have 2 or whatever that number is full-time working on this? Tourist visitor sites at one point had moorings so that they weren't dragging anchors. Those moorings are all long gone due to lack of maintenance. Well, maybe they should be put back in, but maintained. But if you're going to have a vessel dedicated to maintaining those moorings, where should that vessel come from? Well, once again, it's from that fleet. So I think if we start asking, what does Galapagos need? We can start reducing that latent fishing effort, because what we have in essence is latent fishing effort. We have, 188 small vessels and about 15 large vessels, and not enough resource for them to catch. If we think about global markets, we're going to overfish. And we've done that from whaling to sea cucumber to lobster to bacalao, and we're just going to keep on going down. If we have a global market for a local resource, we're going to overfish. So let's think about what we need locally. That doesn't mean to say an end to fishing, or the opposite. We have plenty of opportunities inside Galapagos. For a start, any of you who've been to Galapagos to one of the sushi restaurants, half of those sushis are salmon. Why are we importing salmon to Galapagos and talking about exporting tuna and billfish? What's our carbon footprint? Surely, aren't we committed to lowering our carbon footprint? So let's ban import of fishing to Galapagos. Let's create a traceability stamp, and let's get people, consumers, to demand that the restaurants where they eat show that they buy responsibly caught fish. How do we know if fish is caught responsibly? Hey, There's a company called Shellcatch, and it's not the only one, where you install a camera. In fact, there's my other half of hotspot champion, Manolo Yepes, in the camera, in the photo there. The camera's on a pole in the background. That films his entire fishing effort. When he gets back to port, that gets uploaded into the cloud, analyzed by the Shellcatch company. They can see exactly what he caught. If he caught something that he didn't want to, it gets released, all on camera. And then he gets a QR code and gets to sell that fish under a responsible and traceable seal. A win-win for everyone. Restaurants and tour boats in Galapagos are not yet using this on a wider scale. So we need to get them. Partly it is, I think, because restaurants in Galapagos are already charging so much. So we need to really get the consumers to push for that. So let's develop a Yelp for Galapagos. Let's have a video on the aeroplane as you come into land saying demand responsibly caught produce. Let's partner with, we have a chef school here at the university. Let's create some Galapagos recipes. Let's have one evening on your tour boat where instead of having smoked salmon, you have a Galapagos culinary experience where you get your piece of wahoo done in maracuya sauce and your tour leader explains to you why it is that you're eating wahoo and not salmon and how it's caught, and even show a video of that very fish that you're eating and how it was caught and the philosophy behind it, to show that, yes, we are fishing inside of a marine reserve and maybe that's not what everyone likes, but we're also reducing our carbon footprint and feeding the people that are here and doing it sustainably. And if your cruise costs $3,003 instead of $3,001, does that really make a difference for you? I'll just drop that there. And then, of course, there are plenty of added value products that we can make in Galapagos that we've done before. Smoked fish, pâtés, jarred fish, but all of them with that seal, that traceability stamp. So I think there's a future in Galapagos, but it's not a future that involves looking for external markets, which leads to longlining. And the reason I really wanted to spend some time on this today is because this may end up happening this year. And so if any of you have any ideas or thoughts on really how to address this in a win-win situation for everyone, then I'd be delighted to hear from you. And with that, I think I will call it a day. And like I always say, if we can get it right in Galapagos, maybe we can get it right elsewhere too.
Thank you so much, Alex. I think that was a great arc to the conversation where we highlighted some of these great successes that have happened. Getting very excited about the science, that we've still got so much to learn, so much to find out from this amazing marine reserve and its surrounds, but also not shying away from these big issues that still are there. And I do think that's important to keep these conversations open. Also very much appreciate the view of ending with solutions, because I mean, I would often say this isn't rocket science, definitely marine science, but like there are solutions on the table. We don't have to keep doing things the way they always were, and we don't have to necessarily be in this growth mindset for all the economies that are around the islands too. So really appreciate that the sharing of your views on the complicated issues, like you say, very controversial. So please, if anybody has any questions or comments to Alex, put them in on the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I'm going to start with quite a big question here. So you've mentioned, definitely alluded to some of this already, but what are the biggest barriers to getting the local fishing community on side with a different way of looking? Like, what is missing in the equation right now?
I think the other side of the story is too easy in terms of you at the moment you already have a global market which you can tap into. There are intermediaries that already have their network set up that will buy produce from Galapagos and distribute that abroad. And even though they won't buy it at such a high price, because you can get volume if you're using long lines, then it's less of a problem. And many fishers want to be able to hand over their catch and forget about it. And so hand over the cash, get paid for it, and then, not worry about those next steps. So I think it's really the resources to show that, okay, you could do that, but then maybe let's build those little enterprises locally, and get those nexuses set up, because the other side is already set up, is ready to go, and the fishermen are impatient. And I think the other thing is the fishing sector in Galapagos has often been over-promised things, and that's led now to certain skepticism. So if I say to you, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna, I wouldn't say to fishermen right now, I'm going to invest in switching, some vessels from doing one thing to another if I didn't have the money to do it. So we need to get resources together and a strong vision. And then the other thing is to have a strong commitment from Galapagos authorities that if we do go this route, that then they don't say, oh, well, because we took out four fishing vessels to turn them into science vessels, now we can put another 4 in, right? We need to make sure that we're aiming towards what is the ideal size of the fishing fleet for Galapagos. What's that magic number, if you like? And we don't have that magic number yet. No one's really thought of it that way. It's all been thought the other way. We have these 1,000 fishermen. We have these 333 vessels. We need to find a way to make it work. And so that flip is what we need to get done.
Yeah. So one thing that really stuck out for me in that conversation was about the new fisheries regulations and the conversations that are happening now, and the lack of science that's represented in that consortium at the moment. Could you share a bit of insight into what is the type of science or what are the science options we have for a more sustainable fishery? Like, in an ideal world where we're not resource limited, what would we be doing to really track, what's sustainable with these exploited species?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we need to monitor our fishing effort and our catch. And we used to have onboard observers in Galapagos. So it's more than just landings, because landings, what you catch, what you land officially isn't necessarily the same. And do you remember exactly where you caught what? So I think a decent onboard observer program is fundamental. And then, of course, you need to know things such as, how fast do these animals grow? What's their reproductive capability? What's the ecological role? I mean, one thing, fishery science has moved away from, when I studied fishery science, it was very much species oriented. And some of the earliest work I did in Galapagos with the lobsters was, okay, what are their growth rates, reproduction rates? How does that mean in terms of mortality? How much more mortality can they take? Are we catching too much or too little? What would be an ideal amount? That's all fine. But what's the ecological impact of removing 30 tons of lobsters from the reef each year? So that's that other level which has come in the last maybe 20 years, when we think you'd have a more of an ecosystem approach. And so none of that, I think, I'm sorry to harp on about the slipper lobster, but when I read, this Fisheries Canada, and it said that, that they'd had expert input, to be honest with you, I know of 2 people that have published on the biology and ecology of slipper lobsters. That's Gunter Reck and myself. Neither of us were involved in this. And so I don't know who is speaking for the biodiversity of the islands in these forums. And I suspect it's no one.
Yeah, well, I think to raise the point about invertebrates in particular, they're always the last on the list. I mean, fish is bad enough in terms of the amount of attention, but when we get into lobsters and crabs, and it's very, very poor, the management of those species in many places.
Actually, if you don't mind me interrupting there for a second,
please.
You're absolutely right. And yet, DEFRA put out a report a couple of years ago which ended my consumption of octopus. I was kind of one of the last evil marine biologists still eating octopus. And I'd say, well, if it's done sustainably, then I don't have an argument with it. But a lot of these invertebrates, octopus, lobster, squid, they're sentient. And so then you come into a different argument, which is what really did it for me. I read that DEFRA report and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I haven't had any octopus since. Is that there's no humane way of killing them. So if you don't have the humane way of killing these animals, preparing them for food, then you know, so I think that report went a long way to change those of us who read it, our perception of invertebrates. Like, oh, hang on a minute, you know, if we're uncomfortable about how our meat or our poultry is killed before we eat it, then we should feel the same way about some of these invertebrates. So I think things are changing there.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Absolutely. Was also very shocked to hear about that thresher shark stat. Could you tell us a little bit more about what we do know about thresher sharks so far? And also, somebody's also asked, do we know like which country is behind the main fishery activity around that species?
Yeah, sure. Well, threshers, there's 3 species of thresher shark. We get all 3 of them. There's the common thresher, which is ironically the rarest one here in Ecuador. And then we have the pelagic thresher and the big eye thresher. They're quite difficult to tell apart. It took me a while. The big eye thresher, if you look at it from above, you can almost see the entire eye because it's always looking kind of upwards. And then the position of the fin is slightly different. So these are all species that have that very slow reproductive rate. So with the pelagic thresher, the one I was talking about earlier, very low reproductive rate, slow growing. They have those beautiful long tails, those whip-like tails, which they use to stun their prey. They leap out of the water. They tend to most of the time be offshore. And there's not a lot known about their ecology, except that they tend to spend daytime hours deep in the water column, so several hundred meters down, and then they do these diel migrations. Isn't really a migration, more of a commute. So they're following the light intensity up and down, and that's kind of interesting because in one of the to come back to longlining, in one of the meetings I was at a few weeks ago about a potential another longlining experiment in Galapagos, they were saying that, oh well, we're going to set our lines really deep at 150 meters, so there's no sharks that deep. Well, in all likelihood, and we've put depth sensors on these ones, so I'll be able to get back to you on that. But if they behave like thresher sharks elsewhere, they're going way down deeper than 150 meters. So they're still going to be vulnerable. Now, who's fishing them? Remember, they're protected in Galapagos, and the people that want to longline in Galapagos now, they don't want to target sharks. I'm not concerned. I'm not so concerned about that. I'm concerned about the bycatch and the fact that when the sharks are on the hooks, they get stressed and they eventually die. But the mainland longline fishery, like I said, 21% of their catch, and that's and overall 60% of all the sharks they catch are this species. And these are being landed. The meat is now being used, but again, I suspect that's an artificial creation because years ago, when the ban on sharks was overturned, President Correa said, well, you can use them if you land them whole. And we want to make sure that you use everything. So then they generated this market, and so you can get shark here in Quito. The problem is that it's mislabeled a lot of the time as tuna. So there is fraud going on, and shark meat is consumed here unwittingly. A lot of it goes to Peru, and from Peru then it gets exported to China. Now, there's been a recent development. Ecuador hasn't really done its homework when it comes to CITES, which is the International Convention for International Trade on Wildlife. And because it hasn't done its homework for sharks, Ecuador is now banned from exporting any shark project for species that are listed on CITES. And luckily, thresher sharks are. So I don't know right now whether that's going to have an impact. One thing is that they might just carry on doing it illegally because the borders are fairly porous, but it may have an impact on how these things are caught. But then outside our national fleet, we have these international fleets too. We have Spanish longliners out there. We have, Chinese vessels. And so, it's like an onion. You have several layers of threat depending on where you are at any given point.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes lots of sense. I definitely, I'm fascinated by those species. They're incredible. The threshers are beautiful animals. Now just jumping into another species, the whale sharks. We're talking about the connectivity of whale sharks with Costa Rica and Peru. Do we know if there's any connectivity with whale sharks and Colombia? and somebody has put that along the coast in Colombia, it would be great to know if the populations are connected, and they usually arrive between March and May.
Yeah, almost certainly. I think we've had, I think we have had a sighting of an animal sighted at Malpelo and then at Galapagos. So the problem with whale sharks is what we're seeing really is that the offshore site, so Galapagos is almost entirely made up of adults, and all the work that's done on the coast, it's 98% juveniles, right? So to get that connectivity, you have to tag them offshore, or be really lucky if you're onshore. So I don't think we'll see any of the large females that we've tagged in Galapagos come right up to areas such as coastal Panama, Colombia, and such. Having said that, though, there's kind of movements up and down the coast, the animals that we tagged in Peru that moved into Ecuador. I'm sure as we develop these more coastal studies, we'll get these movements coming along. So essentially what you have is kind of the subadult juvenile life stage using the entire continental shelf from, Central America to South America, and then the adults more offshore. And it's I think the connectivity is going to be more like that. But yeah, for sure.
It's so cool, like piece by piece, putting this puzzle together, right? Decades of work and so much collaboration, but the story is becoming clearer bit by bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have to finish today, so I know that you have to jump to another session. But in the last few minutes, I wondered if you could share some insights to one of our passions in common, which is inspiring the next generation. So Alex and I and the GCT team have worked a lot on this topic, and hopefully many of you are already familiar with our Marty the Hammerhead storybook, which actually we wrote together before with Sarah Langford, one of our great colleagues. We wrote before the swimway was announced, which we mentioned earlier, between Ecuador and Costa Rica, and it's been a really useful tool for us here in the UK. I just wondered if you could share a bit with how Marty has been used in Ecuador and where you see the future of education work together.
Yeah, sure. In fact, my next session is at my kids' school in an hour, and it's exactly about Marty. So this is a good thing to end on. Prep me for in a little while. Yeah, I mean, Marty's been used in Galapagos. I don't think it would be too ambitious to say pretty much every kid in San Cristobal has been in contact with Marty at one point or another. So Lady Apollo at the Galapagos Science Center there has really led the push to implement the teaching materials that we all developed with you guys at all the schools in San Cristobal. She was even doing it through WhatsApp during the pandemic, and really building that idea that the Galapagos. So the message is different depending on where you are. I mean, in Galapagos, we were really interested in showing the children of Galapagos, who for the most part, love sharks already. So the big message there is all about connectivity. Galapagos, yes, it's their islands, but there's this connection between Cocos and between the coast and between Peru. And so to think about the fact that what they do in Galapagos can affect other places. And they're starting to be aware of that, unfortunately, because they're receiving plastics that are coming from other places too. So the messaging there is really important. And I think so starting off in San Cristobal, pretty much all the kids have been in contact there. And then I know that Anne Jesus has done a lot of work in Santa Cruz, and now Sophie as well, who's there too. And so the idea is to really get Marty onto Isabella now and Floriana, which are kind of less accessible islands to us. And just keep that idea up about Galapagos, for all that their islands are also connected, for better and for worse. Then on the mainland, I think is the really big challenge, because there is where what we wanted to do is get into the communities where the parents are the fishers and still see sharks as a resource rather than as wildlife. And so by communicating and by getting the kids to love Marty and Tico and Lucia, really get that transfer to the parents. And that's something that we've just started recently with a collaboration with Amiguitos del Océano, which are an NGO based on the coast. And this morning I had a meeting with another NGO, and I'm hoping we'll partner with them because they have their kids clubs and their access to schools. So really to work there. And then in Costa Rica too. And then I think finally, kind of adding to what we talked about earlier about all this connectivity is what I'd like to see next is the original idea behind Manta, if you remember, was actually a story about a whale shark that went to Peru, and we kind of changed halfway down the line because it was important to get this swimway out and this connectivity between Galapagos and Cocos. I think after my experience in Peru with Ever, the little boy, and the whale sharks we tagged there, I'm thinking that we need to get Lucia to have her own adventure. Maybe she can bump into Marty, but I'd like to see something that connects Peru with Galapagos, and link that to some story. Yeah, so that's where I see that going. But the idea is it's really to change that vision of sharks as resource species towards wildlife.
I think that is about the most perfect message to end this session on. Thank you again, Alex, for your time, and thanks to everyone for joining us. For sure, that is a piece of work we want to continue growing, that environmental education section of our portfolio. I think it's critical for the future. And it's so exciting to see, you know, Marty is still having that impact, is continuing to grow, and we hope to then build on that. That's really excellent. So yeah, thanks to you all for joining. Just a final plug for Galapagos Day. Please get your tickets and come and meet us to talk more about plastics and ocean science, 10th of October. We have other webinars available on our YouTube. If you missed the last one on Floriana Island, which was done by Jeff Dawson from Durrell Conservation Trust, that's definitely worth a watch as well. And I hope to join. I hope that you join us for the next webinar in the series. So thank you very much, Alex. And yeah, we'll keep you all posted on Alex's next adventures. And we're speaking up for the lobsters. We'll end it there. Thank you, everybody. Ciao.